Would you believe there's magic in numbers? It sounds strange, almost naive, in a world ruled by science and silicon. But long before fear, before superstition even had a name, numbers were more than symbols. They were portals into the unknown, sacred languages, forces shaping how ancient humans understood existence itself. Some were feared, others were worshipped. They aligned temples with stars and carved calendars into stone. They marked the seasons, guided rituals, and told stories without words. Numbers didn't just measure creation, they described it. They echoed in the stars, the soil, the heartbeat of the earth. And among them, one stood apart, loved and feared, hidden and hunted. A number whispered in secret rites and etched into forgotten monuments. It was carved into cosmic geometry and woven into the human body. 13. To some, a curse, a shadow trailing the edge of order. To others, a sacred key, the step beyond the perfect 12. The spark that breaks the circle and begins creation anew. Chaos and order, death and rebirth, darkness and light, woven into a single code. Look closely and you find it everywhere. 13 lunar cycles shape the true solar year. Ancient Mayans carved calendars with 13 sacred months. Celtic Druids mapped time with 13 sacred trees. Even the human body echoes it. 13 major joints, gateways where life force moves and consciousness breathes. Even myth remembers 12 around 1, 12 constellations circling the sun, 12 apostles gathered around the Christ, 12 emanations flowing from the source. 13 is the force beyond the circle, the leap into transformation. Yet today we flinch at its sight, we erase it from buildings, we skip row 13 on aeroplanes, we avoid gathering 13 at a table, and when Friday meets the 13th day, entire cultures hold their breath. How did something sacred become something feared? How did a cosmic constant carved into the stars become a superstition we try to erase? This is not the story of a number, it is the story of memory, a rhythm buried beneath centuries of noise, a forgotten code that breaks the circle and completes it. This is the story of 13. It was a dawn that changed everything. October 13th, 1307. Mist hung over Paris as if the city sensed betrayal. By order of King Philip IV, blessed by Pope Clement, the Knights Templar, once the most powerful brotherhood on earth, were seized in a single stroke. Warriors and mystics, bankers and builders, guardians of secrets older than their swords. They shaped crusades, crowned kings, carried relics, but on that Friday morning, their temples were stormed, their leaders shackled and dragged into the streets. Confessions were torn from flesh by iron. Many were burned beneath grey skies. One morning was enough to stain a number forever. 13, once woven into sacred calendars and cosmic rhythms, was now whispered with dread. Was it chance that the day fell on Friday the 13th, or a deliberate act to curse the number in memory? From that day, fear coiled around it like smoke. But the roots of that fear stretch far deeper. In Norse myth, 12 gods feasted in Valhalla. The uninvited 13th, Loki, slipped in like a shadow. By night's end, beloved Balder lay dead. 13 became the mark of betrayal. In Christian memory, 12 gathered at a sacred table. The 13th, Judas, rose to betray with a kiss. Order broke, harmony fell. Again, 13 bore the blame. The fear spread. 13 guests meant misfortune. 13 steps to the gallows meant the soul would not rise. 13 letters in a name, death walked near. The whisper became a chorus. Skyscrapers leapt from floor 12 to 14. Airlines erased row 13. Hotels avoided room 13. Calendars grew cautious. When Friday met the 13th day, businesses stalled. Travel slowed. Contracts went unsigned. Belief hardened into tradition. Tradition became habit. Habit turned into silent law. Yet beneath the fear, a deeper truth whispers, older than kings and gods, older than betrayal or superstition. Something etched into nature's bones, a rhythm no myth could erase and no architect could skip. Because this fear did not begin here, it runs deeper, into moons and seasons, into the turning of time, into the code of creation itself. In Rome and Greece, weddings avoided the 13th day. A union forged beneath that number was said to unravel, threads loosening before vows could hold. In Mesopotamia, builders left the 13th stone unplaced, believing completion under that count invited collapse. Shops skipped the 13th tally in a ledger, as if ink itself could summon ruin. Sailors cut the 13th knot before a voyage. Craft guilds wrote 12 plus 1 on beams, courting protection without naming their fear. Creation counts in silence, not in words, not in symbols, but in pulses and patterns. And if you listen closely, one number hums at the heart of it all: 13. 13 lunar cycles shape the true solar year, not the 12 we print on calendars, but the ancient rhythm the Earth has always known. The Celts carved their sacred year into 13 months. The Mayans aligned their cosmos to 13 heavens and 13 tones of creation. Even the planet's breath divides time into 4 seasons of 13 weeks, each beat another step in a cosmic spiral of birth, death, and renewal. The body remembers the same law. From crown to root, 13 major joints form the gates through which life force flows and consciousness moves. They are not random hinges of bone, they are the rhythm of movement itself, the geometry of a being designed to evolve and ascend. Even within the strands of our DNA, spirals echo that hidden cadence, reminding us that structure follows the same forgotten song. Everywhere you look, the pattern repeats. 13 layers in the shell of a nautilus, 13 turns in the spiral of a pine cone, and in the unfolding of a sunflower's heart. The oceans rise and fall to 13 tides each lunar year. Creation does not count like we do, it counts like itself, and the code it favors is 13. Even myth mirrors this truth in sacred architecture. 12 constellations circle a central sun. 12 apostles gather around the Christ. 12 Olympians stand before the hidden 13th throne of chaos. 12 tribes spiral outward from a single source. Always 12 around one, a circle and its center. 13 is not an addition but a transformation. The leap beyond completion, the doorway to the next order. What we dismissed as superstition was always a signature. It is etched into the moon and written in our bones. It shapes the flow of seasons and the rise of civilizations. It is not chaos, it is code, and it has been here since the beginning, a pulse beneath creation, waiting for us to remember what it means. We called it a curse. We feared the number that followed 12, the one that stepped beyond the circle. To us, 13 meant endings, the breath after the story stops. It was the 13th guest who shattered the feast, the 13th step that led to the gallows, the 13th day that carried betrayal and ruin. But endings are not what we think they are. Nature has never feared the end. It folds death into life, decay into growth. Leaves fall so spring can return. Stars collapse so galaxies can bloom. A seed must break to become a tree. The very fabric of existence is built on cycles, and every cycle needs a point where one thing dies so another can rise. 13 is that point. It is the pulse that ends one pattern and begins another. It is the fracture that lets light through the shell. Where 12 holds structure, 13 releases it. Where 12 keeps balance, 13 tips it toward change. Ancient initiates understood this. They called 13 the gate, the threshold one must cross to leave one state behind and enter another. Egyptian texts spoke of 12 gates of night and a 13th dawn, where the soul was reborn. Mystics mapped 12 emanations around the source and a 13th point beyond them, the spark of the next creation. Even in myth, death is not an end but a turning. Osiris is torn apart so he may rise as king of the dead. Christ dies and returns transformed. The serpent sheds its skin, the phoenix burns to rise anew. Again and again, the story is the same. What falls away is not destroyed, it is remade. 13 is not the hand that ends the story, it is the page turning. It is the collapse that clears space for birth. It is the silence before a new song begins. It is the space between breaths, the pause between heartbeats where something vast moves unseen. We feared it because we mistook the unknown for doom, but endings were never enemies. They were invitations to grow, to rise, to transform. And 13 was never a curse. It was the number that dared to ask, what if the end was not the end at all? What if 13 was never the end, but the next beginning? What if what we called a fall was really a step up? In every ancient science of transformation, the pattern repeats. 12 holds the circle, and 13 breaks it open. Alchemists knew this well. They spoke of 12 stages of transmutation, from calcination to coagulation, each refining matter closer to perfection. But the 13th was never written. It was the moment when the stone was born, when the old form dissolved and the new one emerged. It was not a step you took, it was a leap you became. Mystics told the same story through the human spirit. 12 layers of consciousness, 12 strands of sleeping DNA, 12 gates of perception, and a 13th state beyond them all. It is the state of awakening, where awareness turns inward and realizes it was the source all along. It is not more, it is transcendent. The cosmos too speaks this language. 12 constellations shape the zodiac, but their dance spirals around a hidden center. A 13th axis, still and silent, from which their motion begins. 12 dimensions hold space, but the 13th is the womb that contains them all. Even symbols of change follow the same code. The serpent sheds its skin to grow. The phoenix must burn to rise. The seed must split to become the tree. Every metamorphosis hides a 13th act, the one beyond structure, beyond form, beyond what was. 13 is that act. It is not addition but expansion, not another piece of the circle, but the spiral rising from it. It is the breath after death, the spark after silence, the turning of the wheel into a spiral that climbs toward what is next. We feared it because we thought it broke the order. But the truth is more beautiful. 13 does not destroy order, it evolves it. It does not end the story, it writes the next chapter. It is the pulse of transformation, the invisible force pulling life forward, the number that does not belong to what is, because it belongs to what will be. We were taught to fear what breaks the circle. We built our temples on 12 and turned our faces from 13, believing it was chaos, danger, imbalance. But what if the circle was never meant to hold us forever? What if its purpose was to prepare us, to step beyond? The ancients hinted at this truth in stories and stone. The zodiac is a wheel of 12, but its center, the 13th point, is stillness itself, the axis around which the heavens turn. Apostles gathered 12 around one, not to complete a number, but to awaken a higher order. 12 tribes spiraled from a single source, but the source itself was the 13th, the one beyond the many. 13 is not part of the circle because it is the path out of it. It is the spiral rising upward, the thread pulling us beyond what we know. It is the hidden door in the pattern, the invitation to leave repetition behind and enter evolution. All growth follows this law. The child breaks the womb to breathe. The seed splits open to rise. The stars collapse to become something greater than before. Each time a structure ends, and something vaster takes its place. so it is with us. The patterns we cling to must break for us to ascend. The stories we inherit must dissolve for us to see the truth. The cages we fear leaving are the very thresholds of our becoming. 13 is that threshold. It is the step into the unknown, the pulse of the universe urging creation to surpass itself. It is not the destroyer of order, it is order's evolution. Not the shadow beyond the light, but the light beyond the shadow. What we feared was never death, it was change. And what we called chaos was the universe reaching for something greater. 13 is the whisper of that reach. It is the number of becoming, the breath after the breath, the moment after the last moment, the beginning hidden inside the end. It was never a curse. It was the map home and the path beyond. To the ancients, 13 was not a number, it was a passage, a key that turned in the hidden lock of creation, a threshold that separated what is from what can be. The alchemists knew this language best. They spoke of 12 stages: calcination, dissolution, conjunction, fermentation, each one a breaking and remaking of matter. But the final transformation, the birth of the philosopher's stone, was never numbered. It was not a step that could be mapped. It was the 13th, the leap where base becomes gold, where mortal becomes divine. The ancients called it transmutation, but what they meant was ascension. Mystery schools across the ages taught the same truth. In Kabbalah, 12 emanations spiral from the source, but the 13th, Keter, is the crown, the hidden gate where the finite touches the infinite. In Egyptian temples, 12 gates guarded the sun's journey through night. The 13th was dawn, rebirth from darkness, Ra rising again. 13 even shaped the cycles of time and flesh. 13 moons turn the wheel of a year, the true calendar etched into the body of the sky. 13 menstrual cycles mark the rhythm of creation in the body of woman, a sacred echo of birth, death, and renewal that empires tried to erase. They carved calendars to 12 and called 13 unlucky, but the pulse of life never changed. Everywhere the code repeats, 12 holds the structure, 13 dissolves it. 12 builds the temple, 13 opens its hidden door. 12 is the known, 13 is the becoming. Even within us, the pattern stirs. 12 cranial nerves speak the language of the body, but mystics spoke of a 13th current, the awakening of Kundalini, the serpent fire rising through the spine to crown the soul. They called it enlightenment. Science calls it coherence. Both mean the same thing, transformation. 13 is the fire that turns matter into spirit, ignorance into wisdom, lead into gold. It is the whisper that every ending is a beginning disguised. It is the invisible step that carries us beyond our limits. Not a curse to be feared, but the code that teaches how to evolve. If 13 was once a key, why was it buried? Why did the world turn from reverence to fear? The answer is power. What is hidden cannot be used, and what cannot be used cannot awaken. When empires rose, they rewrote the calendar. 13 moons became 12 months. The sacred rhythm of earth and womb was cut apart, replaced by a neat order that served kings, not nature. Time itself was altered, not for truth, but for control. The lunar codes, tied to fertility, harvest, and the divine feminine, were pushed into shadow. 13 was called chaos because chaos cannot be ruled. It was labeled unlucky because awakening cannot be owned. Temples that once aligned with 13 gates were rebuilt around 12. Sacred myths were retold to make 13 the villain, a traitor, a devil, a shadow at the feast. Even language conspired in the silence. Architects skipped the 13th floor. Scribes wrote 12 plus 1 instead of 13. Omission became tradition. Tradition became law. And so the number vanished from the visible world. Not because it lost its meaning, but because it had too much. Because it pointed beyond the circle, beyond authority, beyond fear. But truth has a way of surviving in whispers. It lived on in symbols carved into cathedrals, in myths that spoke of one beyond 12, in the hidden calendars of druids and the prayers of mystics. It waited beneath the noise, a buried heartbeat. 13 never died, it was buried alive. And now, as old patterns crumble, its pulse grows louder, calling us to remember what was taken and to reclaim what was always ours. Even buried truths leave fingerprints. Even silence speaks when you know how to listen. 13 never vanished, it hid in plain sight. Its echo lingers in stone and symbol, in empires and oaths. The number they called cursed became the mark they built the world upon. Look closely at the Great Seal of the United States. 13 stars blaze above the eagle's head. 13 arrows clutched in its talon. 13 leaves on the olive branch. 13 layers of stone in the unfinished pyramid. A nation forged in reason still chose the number it was taught to fear. In Gothic cathedrals, spires rise in sets of 13. Ancient builders whispered geometry into their walls, ratios and measures tuned to cosmic order. Each was a silent hymn to the hidden code. The same pulse beats beneath secret brotherhoods. The Knights Templar sealed their vows in circles of 13. Rosicrucians wove it into their manifestos. Freemasons etched it into tracings of temples and tools, calling it the step beyond the known. Even language bears its mark. 13 letters hide in divine names. 13 verses frame sacred covenants. The tarot's 13th card, death, is not destruction but transformation. A veil torn so something greater may pass through. It was always there, disguised as superstition, cloaked as coincidence. Architects, mystics, and mathematicians guarded it in plain sight, embedding the forbidden number into the skeleton of civilization itself. Because they knew something most had forgotten. A code cannot be killed once it is written into the cosmos. You can erase it from calendars, skip it in ledgers, curse it in sermons, and fear it in stories. But still it returns, like a heartbeat beneath stone. 13 is the ghost in the blueprint, the secret signature of an older knowledge, one that refused to die because it was never born. It has always been. For centuries, 13 lay buried under fear and superstition. But the deeper we look into the fabric of reality, the more its pulse begins to surface again. In the spiral of galaxies, 13 billion years mark the age of the visible universe. In the strands of our DNA, 13 loci shape the core of genetic inheritance. The lunar rhythm, 13 cycles in a solar year, still governs tides, fertility, and time itself. The cosmos did not forget, only we did. Mathematics whispers the same code. Prime sequences, Fibonacci spirals, and fractal geometries all echo its rhythm. 13 is not random. It is woven into the logic of unfolding complexity. It marks thresholds, shifts, and transformations, the points where systems break pattern and evolve. Even our bodies remember. 13 major joints guide our movement. 13 primary articulations support the dance between earth and sky. Mystics once mapped these as gateways of life force, and science now traces them as nodes of neural flow. Consciousness itself is circling back. Neuroscientists speak of 12 networks in the human brain, but their integration, the state of global coherence, is the 13th state. Quantum physicists explore dimensions beyond the 12th, possibilities once called spiritual, now drawn on chalkboards. The number we once called cursed is revealing itself as a universal language, one spoken by cells and stars, atoms and galaxies. It was never an omen, it was an instruction. And just as nature never stopped counting 13, humanity is beginning to reclaim it too. Scholars revisit the lunar calendar, architects reimagine sacred geometry, mystics and physicists speak in the same breath about pattern and transformation. 13 is rising again, not as fear but as knowledge, not as a superstition but as a signal, a reminder that endings are beginnings, that cycles are spirals, and that what we once feared was only the doorway to what we were meant to become. The fear of something not understood, burying what cannot be controlled. Just as 13 is cursed because it refuses to obey, erased from calendars, skipped in buildings, branded as omen and chaos. Yet numbers do not bend to belief. They carry their truth, whether acknowledged or denied. 13 is not a flaw in the pattern, it is the pattern breaking itself open. The 13th step does not follow, it transcends. It is the moment when the circle surrenders and becomes a spiral. It is the force that turns endings into beginnings, the crack through which creation continues its ascent. The lunar rhythm still carries its pulse, the human frame still echoes its design, the stars still move to its measure. Even when forgotten, the code remains. The curse was never in the number, it was in the refusal to see. Now the buried pulse rises once more. Not to haunt, but to awaken. Not to end, but to remind. 13 was never the shadow. It was the light waiting beyond the circle. The next beginning written inside the end. Not a number, a code, not a curse, a doorway. 13, the rhythm that shapes creation and shatters the circle. Forgotten by fear, yet written into everything that is, the pulse of stars, the pattern of time, the whisper of becoming. This is the story the stars still remember. Detunes, reality,